Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Networking RX podcast. I am your host, Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Today I have a guest on the program with me. I've got Mark Given. Mark Given is a speaker, and he is the developer of the trust-based philosophy. In addition, he's the author, and he has several books along the trust-based philosophy lines. I believe he's got 5. We'll talk about those. He grew up in Ohio, headed to North Carolina. It was probably a cold winter. He decided, hey, we're out of here. Headed to North Carolina, and has been a businessman in North Carolina for years. He had his own business, and then when he had sold that, he got into speaking and teaching on his business-changing trust-based philosophy system. So, Mark, I want to welcome you to the program.
Thank you, Frank. I'm sure glad to be here. Appreciate you having me today.
It's good to have you. Trust, as we were talking about before we hit record, trust is in everything. And I had shared with you that people who don't think that trust is part of their life have never driven down a 2-lane road and not worried about that person coming left of center. But it is very important, and I remember. Well, I talk about in networking. I talk about know, like, and trust. And trust is really kind of. And I'm glad we're talking because it's kind of that thing that's really it when you have it, and it's when you don't, you do as well. But I would remember telling people, you can know somebody, and you can like somebody, and not trust somebody. And I used to be an attorney, and believe me, that's the case. There are a lot of people. It's like, I really like that person. I know him, I like him, but I wouldn't trust him. So anyhow, I guess, can you quickly share about your journey and how you got into your trust-based philosophy? Where did that all come from?
Sure. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version because we need to get into the concept and the principle and the science of trust. But I spent, after college, it's funny you say that because I did graduate from Mount Vernon High School in the center of Ohio. Yeah. And started at Ohio State University. You went to Ohio State, Frank. And but then I had an opportunity to get a full scholarship at a small college in North Carolina, little college called Elon College, which is now Elon University, and graduated from college there. And met my wife while I was in college, and so we stayed in North Carolina. It's much, we have a much more temperate weather here in North Carolina than in Ohio, so we don't have these, big swing winters. So anyway, opened a retail company that I started with one little location, and over the next 20 years grew that to 47 different locations in North Carolina, Virginia. Sold that company. And then right at the end of 1999 and 2000, and then began, another career, which turned into writing a whole series of books. Lucky enough, blessed to be an Amazon #1 best-selling author in 4 different categories. And I've written 9 books now, and 5 of those books are in the trust-based philosophy series. So trust-based selling, trust-based leadership, trust-based networking, which is right in the world of what you do.
Yep.
Trust-based success, so that we don't have the stress in life that we so often surround ourselves with. And then my newest book, which comes out in September of this year, 2020, is trust-based time management and productivity. And then I've got a trust-based entrepreneur book coming out. I got a trust-based referrals book coming out. So I'm not done in the trust-based philosophy. And it's how to use the science of trust to build, maintain, and repair trust within the focus of what your life and business is. Because we all know that, life really begins and it grows in business and life when we have trust and we have developed it and maintain it. But when we don't, boy, it just all comes crumbling down. So I teach the pyramid of trust within those different topics.
So you had you had 47 retail stores, and I would imagine you got into business to be in business because it was lucrative, or because there was a profit motive. At what point did you say, "Oh my gosh, I see trust, I see the importance of it"? Was there a point where it really kind of hit you?
Yeah, you know what? Even as a young man, and have always, my dad was in business, although he worked for Sears his whole life and sold appliances for Sears. But I learned very quickly when I opened my first business that you were right. You just said this just a few minutes ago, as entering into our recording today, that when people know you, like you, and trust you, well, they'll do business with you. And what I learned was there's actually an additional fourth element, which is the better I am at flow, which is maintaining that trust, continuing that relationship. So they can know me, they can like me, but boy, when they trust me, and then when I continue to nurture that relationship so they can continue to trust me. So as a young man, I learned that. I only sold that retail company because the world changed, and what I was focused on and how I built my company, that was changing. It was in the electronic business. And so, primarily in the movie rental business, and it was evolving from, we'd already gone through video cassettes to DVDs, and then it was evolving to online and vending machines. And I could see that retail companies were not going to succeed well. And of course, we saw the evidence of that. I got out and sold, and then you saw what happened to Blockbuster and all those other companies. But so I'm not that smart, but sometimes I do smart things. And so I sold the company while it was really valuable. And then, I just learned so much about building, maintaining, and repairing trust, not only with my customers, but also with those that worked with me and served with me, both my leaders, my managers, all of our staff and employees. And then my wife and I have been married for 42 years. So at the same time as having to practice those principles of trust with in my own personal life and with my children. So trust is something that doesn't go away. I mean, it's the better we are at it, the more joy and less stress we have in our life.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point. Trust in business, trust in our personal lives. It's really all the same.
It's very connected.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, you get betrayed in business or you get betrayed in your personal life. It stings the same.
Yeah.
There's still
it still messes you up pretty bad. You're exactly right.
It does. Now you talk about the science of trust. Can you elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Yeah, sure. So what's interesting is that I've spent about 40 years, didn't even realize how deeply I was studying this important principle of trust. But as I read books and as I was trying to improve my own life and my own circumstances, what I realized was that when it comes to trust, all the books and all the materials that I was, delving into only talked about the concept of trust, that we need it and we, how important it is. And although it's critically important, it goes way deeper than that. There's a science to trust. In other words, what do I need to know and how do I do it? So I actually ended up developing something called a pyramid of trust, which is 4 levels of trust. And to explain that kind of quickly, without going way into depth, is just the first level is what I call the grand opening. It's what I teach. It's how we establish even enough interest that somebody would have that they would want to connect with us or do business with us. So grand opening is critically important. It's just the concept would be, hey, first impressions, right? And how critical those first impressions are. So that's the first level, but it's not just what it is. It's how to do a better job of it. And then the second level is we call it rapport. And rapport, you build a deeper level of trust once you've gotten past that level 1 grand opening. When you get to rapport, we teach the science of listening, because people really, one of their favorite topics is themselves. And so the better listener you are, the better skilled you are at listening, the deeper that people like you. So we teach companies and organizations and people not just the principle of listening, but how to do that better.
Right.
So how to ask better questions and how to listen. So then that takes us then to the third level of trust, which is maintenance, because now that we build it, now we've established it and we've created something. How do we maintain that for a long period of time? Because and the simple principle on that is to define that as being a giver instead of a taker. So it's not just about money. It's about treating people properly in many aspects. And so, in fact, one of my favorite books that I talk about when I talk about the level 3 of the pyramid of trust is what Bob Berg and John David Mann wrote in this series of books called The Go-Giver. I mean, they're friends of mine, and I always promote their books because it's a wonderful example of level 3, which is just the maintenance principle level. And then the last level is the repair, because we all make mistakes. We say things wrong. We do things wrong. Sometimes we're foolish, but sometimes we just don't mean to. So I help companies and organizations and people understand that there is a proper science and process to going through the apology, and so, yeah, I mean, you cannot force somebody to accept your apology, but there's a proper system for apology. We call that the RAS system, which is recognize you've done something wrong and then acknowledge to the world, right, or to the individuals that you actually are smart enough to realize you have harmed them in some way. And then you show some sympathy, right, some remorse for what you've done. Maybe it's even going to take some effort to rectify the situation, right?
Right.
And then, so it's RAS, and then the second S is that you'll just stop. You'll never do that again. You've learned from the experience, and then you'll show people that, hey, you were sincere about your apology, because you're not just saying with lip service, sorry, I won't do that again, but you clearly won't do that again. So that's the 4 levels: grand opening, rapport, maintenance, apology.
Okay. Grand opening, rapport. Where does listening, is that part of rapport then?
Yeah, listening is part of rapport. My dad taught me when I was just a kid that if we could practice, especially in sales, right, but in relationships too, if we could practice, what he taught me was the 90-10 principle. In other words, he really followed the Dale Carnegie principle, how to win friends and influence people. And that principle was really, if you just talk 10% of the time, listen 90% of the time, people love you, because what they really want to talk about is what they're interested in anyway, which is themselves and their own circumstance. So you listen more and you talk less. And it's amazing how it builds deeper levels of trust, but it does. People love you and they trust you when you show that you're interested in them and sincerely interested.
Yeah, I mean, it's human nature, and it's interesting. None of this stuff is new, but the science that they're discovering is new.
That's right.
And we're kind of in the golden age of the golden age of, not want to say mental health, but just kind of mental awareness. This psychological awareness, and.
I'll give you a good point on that, on the grand opening as an example. If you ask people if they were ever taught through their young life that you only have one opportunity to make a first impression, everybody will say yes. They were taught that principle, right? And we all know that's true. But what they don't know is the science behind it, because there is now science to prove how quickly people do form a first impression of you. And we use a tough word called profiling, but we do use that while we're being profiled by others, we're also profiling. But the science now shows that we form if you have a healthy brain, if you're just a normal, healthy adult,
right?
And by the way, children are almost exactly the same. But anyway, we actually form that opinion not in seconds, not in minutes, but in 50 milliseconds. Our brain is a supercomputer, and we form that opinion based on what we see. Do I like that person? Are they a good person? Do they look like they're going to be a kind person? So we're judging in 50 milliseconds on care and competence. And Harvard spent 15 years studying that. And after, scanning hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of brains, with MRIs, because they can tell how your brain lights up. 50 milliseconds. That's amazing. I mean, that's who'd have guessed? That's in less than a blink of an eye. So that means the science says we better be pretty darn careful about how we make our first appearance when we're showing up for the first time at an event, at a program, at a date, right? I mean, there's just so many. We better do it right, because we only get one chance. And then there's this science called a cognitive bias, that once we as an individual form that opinion on somebody else, we want to be right. And so our cognitive biases go to work trying to prove that we were right. If I believe I can trust you, then I'm going to go to work proving that all the reasons that I can trust you. And if that first impression is I can't, then my brain's going to go to work trying to find reasons that I'm right, that you're not a trustworthy person. So, that they've never, I know your listeners have never heard that before. 50 milliseconds. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You talk about it. What's the halo and the horns effect, right? If you like somebody, and we see that in politics every day, because you'll have one candidate, and I'm not going to get into politics,
sure.
Names, we don't need to, but you have one candidate say one thing and vilified for it, and have another candidate pretty much say the same thing, and it's the greatest thing in the world. And it's all, no, it's how they said it. No, it's just you like them. That's what it boils down to.
Human nature. And our cognitive biases just work constantly to prove that we're right. We love to be right. And so it's very difficult. That brings us right back up to level 4 of the pyramid of trust, is that when you find that you've messed up, even whether you didn't mean to, you've got to, you don't have to, but clearly if you want to connect with this group of people or this individual, you've got to find a way to repair it. And the right way to do it is that, that 4-step, RAS is what we teach. So.
Now, let's say that first impression doesn't come off as well as you would like. And that happens, right? I mean, for whatever reason, what would your advice be to listeners, as to subsequent impressions, how to rectify? I guess that goes right up to repair then, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, because you know what, you can't go to rapport and you can't go to maintenance because you're not there yet. If you can't get past the grand opening. So here's what's interesting, because we really do have this internal we have these internal impressions that, boy, that didn't go very well. I could have done better. Well, maybe that's when you just need to own up to it, right? And that's where you go to level 4 and come, and just admit, hey, you know what? I didn't do a very good job. I feel like I didn't make a very good first impression. What you'll find, if they do that, immediately to level 4, is that the other person most often, depends on their personality, but most often they'll say, oh, no, it was fine. But it's not fine.
Yeah.
So then you just have to go through those steps and say, hey, you know what? I didn't do a very good job. I recognize that I could have done a better job. And our relationship, I feel like it would be beneficial for both of us, right? So can we just start again, right? And then see where it goes from there. But when you have that feeling, as an attorney, all the time that you were practicing, you probably had impressions often, right, as to how things are going, right?
Oh, yeah.
Whether it be with clients or in whatever your expertise was, at the time. But we have those internal impressions. It's just very critical from a trust building standpoint that we follow those impressions so that we can get even beyond the rapport building stage. Because what we want to thrive in life, we want to live in that maintenance level, which is building relationships that are long lasting and powerful, beneficial for us and for the other individual, to be a giver, right? And when we get there, that's when our lives thrive. But it's hard to get there. It takes some time and effort and focus to get from grand opening through rapport and into maintenance. And then we mess it up. So we're circling all the time in this pyramid. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we're not always messing it up, but it's, I don't, I don't know that any relationship is static. I mean, it ebbs and it flows, right? It's, sometimes you're giving, sometimes you're receiving, and it's never, of course, I don't advocate keeping score because it wouldn't be even ever.
I agree with that.
but it does. It kind of ebbs and it flows, and we're kind of assessing, and our minds are fantastic things, scary at times, but but they're that way for a reason. I mean, they've protected us all these years, and we didn't always live in a civilized world. So, let's switch gears here with the time we have remaining. Let's talk a little bit about your business. Obviously, you've written 9 books. You have this whole trust-based philosophy. So, you go on Amazon. The books are out there. He was a #1 best-selling author. And again, Mark Gibbons. And I'll get his name and information in the show notes. What other sorts of things do you do?
Well, my real focus now, I've been very fortunate and blessed in my life. I'm lucky to have a good, healthy family that is doing well. I mean, I have the normal, worries, but my wife and I are old enough now that we're not done. So I guess to really answer that question well, it is my real focus now is to try to help people do a better job of building, maintaining, repairing trust. And so I have this huge goal to actually have a positive effect on 100 million people. And so it's not about making money, although I do get paid for what I do, obviously,
Sure.
but my focus is not, trying to be a wealthy, man. I gain wealth by helping other people succeed, and that's where my focus is. So I think that's the answer to your question. I really am serious that if I can have a positive effect on 100 million people, help them build, maintain, and repair trust better so that they can create the lives that they want, that's my focus. So that's why I keep writing books with different, in different topics, so that I can at least share what my belief and philosophy is on how to help people build and have a better life built on trust. And so,
yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, when you have a book, trust-based selling, if somebody's not in sales, they're going to dismiss that as, well, I'm not in sales.
Sure.
Sure.
Sure. Because the byline on that is, proven ways to stop selling and start attracting. And the reason for that is because, hey, nobody really likes an icky salesperson. So how do we use trust to as effectively in sales? I just did a program recently. I think I mentioned this to you pre-show that, for municipal clerks. I don't know if I said that specifically, but anyway, their need is very different than somebody that's in sales. Your need is your focus really is in networking and growing people in networking, and how to do that well to build, maintain, and repair trust is critically important to those people within what you do. And you cover lots of industries, and that's very cool in the way that you do that. So I really wrote the networking book just to reach out to those people that have that kind of interest of what you need. And then all of my programs, no matter who I'm out speaking for, I customize those programs. I don't have a template. I'm really interested in, what's that organization's needs, what are their challenges, and how can I customize a program to really help them understand how we use this important principle to help those people succeed. So that's where my focus is now. So.
Yeah. I mean, you have one tool with a lot of uses.
Yeah, because everybody understands trust because they've all been through it when it was good, and they've all been, I don't think I've ever met anybody that at some point or another didn't understand how bad it feels to mess up. And so I end up talking about that, a lot. People ask a lot of questions about that. But I love talking about the grand opening, the rapport, and the maintenance. It's interesting that how often people think, oh, I know I got that maintenance down. And yet there's just so many ways to be better at being a giver, right? And to deepen those levels, because the better you are at becoming a giver, the deeper levels of trust you have. And when you do have a challenge or a difficulty, those deep levels, you built this deep, account of empathy and sympathy and worth. It's much easier to overcome level 4 when you have really a deep level 3. So
it's like a bank account.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
Covey talked about that as building an emotional bank account.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. I mean, we don't think of it in dollars and cents, but there are, you think about people in your life and who may have stepped on your toes, and if you have that base that's there,
Sure.
it's not a big deal. It's like, yeah, okay, things happen, let's move on. So
Sure. Yeah.
Good. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, I'm easy to be found, actually. So Mark Given, MarkGiven.com.
Okay.
My email address is just mark@markgiven.com. And actually, if there's a listener out there that has some interest or some question, if they just go to my website, markgiven.com, they can find me. All my contact information is there. And I would invite all of your listeners to go on my website and sign up for my weekly Mark's Minute, because I every Wednesday morning, I've been doing this for a little over 8 years now. I have not missed a Wednesday, and I have literally a 1-minute message that I send out. They can find those messages on LinkedIn. They can find those on my website, but it's a 1-minute message that comes out every Wednesday morning, and I invite everybody to come and get that message. I talk about all kinds of things and all different aspects of life, and what I at the moment that I feel like is relevant and important and needs to be said. So.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you being on the program today.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.